Little Compton is a small and quaint beach town very close to Newport. Angela Spence Shaw works in a garden shop in Little Compton, but she doesn't come to work this particular day, and that's concerning. She's 66 years old and apparently reasonably good health, so a coworker is dispatched to her home.
Angela?
To make sure everything is all right.
Angela, are you home?
The coworker tries the door, finds it to be unlocked.
Angela?
Nothing's out of place. Everything looks fine. But there's no Angela.
Angela, are you up here?
She pushes open the bathroom door. Angela Spence Shaw is submerged in a bathtub filled with water. And her coworker has found Angela under questionable conditions. Is this a homicide? Is this an accident? What is this? Well, that's the $64 question. I spent my career closing murder cases. But I'm not the only one who answered the call. It takes a rare breed to solve the unsolvable, to catch a ruthless killer, to find justice for the dead. That's what it takes to be an American detective.
My name is Stephen Lynch. I was with the state police for 23 years. At the time of this investigation, I was a lieutenant assigned as the officer in charge of the State Police Major Crimes Unit, as well as the Violent Fugitive Unit. You do absolutely see people at their worst, unfortunately, but incredibly rewarding, and the time in those units went by incredibly fast. Back in 1999, it was a holiday weekend.
You ready for your game today?
And my son at the time was 12 years old.
Oh, hold on.
And I was at his Little League baseball game and got the call as to what was starting to evolve down in Little Compton.
Ah, shoot. I gotta go, sweetheart.
As head of the Major Crimes Unit, when you get the call, you go.
Go get him, buddy.
Bye, Dad.
When we got there, we gathered our personnel and started to make our list, if you will, of how we're going to attack this case.
Stephen Lynch is the commander of the Major Case Squad of the Rhode Island State Police. He is the quarterback of the team. He is in command of a group of detectives, and they descend on the village of Little Compton to determine the nature of this case.
Detective.
Lieutenant, sorry to ruin your weekend.
There is a detective on this police department, only one. His name is Sid Wardell.
Come on in.
I was a patrol officer, working detectives for the town of Little Compton, Rhode Island. In 1999, the Little Compton Police Department consisted of 9 officers. This was certainly beyond our capabilities as an agency.
There hasn't been a homicide in Little Compton since the 1960s. There's probably no one on the police department that's ever seen a homicide. So they want to get involved with the Rhode Island State Police.
We did a walkthrough of the scene, certainly taking note at that time that the house had been under construction and the victim was on the 2nd floor of her residence.
What do we know so far?
The body was found in the bathtub, but first, take a look in here.
What I recall is the tremendous amount of blood evidence in the bedroom.
some of the things that are going through your mind, was this something accidental? Did she fall and cause injury to herself and then ends up in the tub?
So what are we thinking? Head injury?
Most likely, but check this out.
One thing that really jumped out to me was the bed linens were gone.
It was quite clear to me at that point that something had gone wrong here, and it wasn't by her own hand.
So the action takes place in the bedroom, the result takes place in the bathroom.
We don't know anything about this lady at this point, so we don't know when this happened, how long she had been in the bathtub. Did she come home and find somebody breaking into her house?
Take a look at this.
There was a lot of things in that house that were of value.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a robbery.
There was no theft. There was $500 left in her wallet, in her bedroom. All her jewelry was still there. There was no obvious motive here.
What do we got in here?
Upon going through the scene, the victim had been removed from the bathtub.
This scene was very unique. The fact that where she was found within a bathtub, a hairdryer in the tub of water with her body.
So I think some natural instinct is that this was accidental. Is somebody being electrocuted?
Whoa. Definitely not an accident.
It was abundantly clear that she had sustained tremendous blunt force trauma. That what happened to her was nothing you would ever want anyone to have to go through.
This was a vicious, brutal crime. The injuries on the victim made her unrecognizable. One of her friends that worked on the rescue service, she told us, I can't even tell you if that's her. That's how brutal the injuries were.
You kill someone, you put them in a bathtub, and you throw in a dryer, hoping the police believe accidental electrocution. What sort of pig did this?
Lieutenant, the victim's sons are waiting outside.
Speaking with the family, you have to weigh what you're able to disclose at that point in the investigation, with the understanding that these are two sons looking for answers as to what happened to their mom.
Would you mind telling me a little bit about your mother?
She was a wonderful person.
We wanted to know what was going on in her life at the time as far as relationships. We needed to get as much background on the victim as possible.
Lynch is informed that the victim is Angela Spence Shaw, an immigrant from Great Britain, who came with her then husband to live in the United States. Her first husband passed away. She remarried, and her second husband also passed away. So she came to live in the village of Little Compton as a widow and to work in a garden shop.
She was a nice woman within that community who gave of herself, working at a greenhouse, that she had a kind of a low-profile lifestyle there in Little Compton.
It just doesn't make any sense.
She was extremely close with her children. She was just a beloved mother and grandmother.
I have no idea who would do this to her.
She has no habits that would produce danger in her world. So the question becomes obvious in everyone's mind. How did Angela come to be in this bathtub?
We're gonna find out whoever did this to your mother. I can promise you that.
I felt a responsibility to get this solved. I think that family deserved, and Angela Spence Shaw deserved answers.
Hey guys, check this out. We got a few early findings.
We were getting results back from the medical examiner's office that alerted us to the fact that she was raped and that semen was found within her body.
During the autopsy, it is critical to determine if there is suspected foreign material in the vaginal vault of the victim because it appears to be sexual assault. In 1999, DNA analysis, although in the beginning stages, was available. It was introduced in the United States in 1990. So it's 9 years since it's been around, and it has a great impact already that will grow to even greater impact as the science advanced. But in 1999, it was sufficient to identify someone uniquely from everyone on Earth. So it's critical during the autopsy that if there is seminal fluid present, that it's recovered and properly preserved. Rhode Island State Police are well aware of that, and they see to it during the autopsy that that is accomplished.
That adds a whole nother element into the investigation.
The fact that there was sexual assault that came into play, that certainly made us then begin concentrating on anybody that would have been a sexual offender in the area.
This could be our guy.
And they remarkably find one, Patrick Zimmerman, who lives in the area.
Zimmerman. Let's go pick him up.
Yeah.
Well now, Mr. Zimmerman, what were you up to the other evening, and how do you explain yourself? Let's go ask him.
Early Sunday morning, 66-year-old Angela Spence Shaw is found murdered in her home, a horrific crime that stunned and frightened residents of the quiet, normally peaceful town of Little Compton. State and Little Compton police launch a massive search for her killer.
One guy's been discovered that's a little edgy.
Zimmerman. This could be our guy.
Patrick Zimmerman. He's a violent sex offender. His history says so. He fits.
Afternoon. Are you Mr. Zimmerman?
Yeah, what's going on?
Do sex offenders repeat their crimes? Yeah, they do. Absolutely, they do.
We'd like to ask you some questions about Angela Spence Shaw.
What if he notices the neighbor lady? What if he notices that nobody's ever around but her? Is it an opportunity? Of course it is.
Look, guys, my wife's about to get home, and I really don't want to explain to her why the cops are here.
You're still trying to be respectful of individuals and not bring unnecessary light onto their past.
So then you wouldn't mind coming down to the station for a quick blood sample then?
You're asking someone to provide a blood sample to eliminate themselves from a crime.
A blood sample?
And how does that compare to the DNA profile of the semen found in Angela Spence Shaw?
It's a very common thing in my own experience to encounter people who have concealed their past from a family they met and produced after they got out of prison. They don't want that family to know that they ever were in prison or that they ever had a past like that. They've spent their life concealing it from people, and now it comes back to haunt them. They can't wait to make the police go away to prevent the discovery of their past.
Yeah, okay. Whatever it takes.
Zimmerman is the picture of cooperation.
I don't want to be tied to this. I'll give you my blood sample. I'll account for my activities at the time in question when this attack took place.
They take a blood sample for subsequent comparison. Blood sample is no match. So he was a promising lead to begin with, but it's not him.
A mother, a grandmother, her face barely recognizable.
The word spread quickly. There was a very somber feeling in the town, kind of this cloud that hung over it. The last homicide had been almost 40 years.
This is a very quiet, low-key community. It's an affluent community. Something like this just does not happen there.
The Rhode Island State Police are faced with the same problem homicide detectives all over the world are faced with. You have little or nothing to go on.
The clock is ticking.
You've got to take what you've got and get creative with it.
Yeah, I got something.
What you got?
What about the only other guy in town who's committed a murder?
Just throwing it on the table, we have this individual.
Who's that?
Stanley Gendreau.
That committed the only other murder in Little Compton, and his family lives almost right across the street from the victim's house.
Stanley Gendreau. He's out of custody these days, served a great deal of time in prison for the initial murder. So he inquires, what happened to this other murder that happened in 1965?
Thank you.
Stanley Gendreau, there was an infatuation that he had with this babysitter. He staked out the house, he had been watching through the windows. He talked about going for a ride. And when she ultimately had refused to go with him...
I got my car right here.
No, thank you. I'm good.
He picked up a rock, actually hit her over the head, and ended up murdering her.
He smashed a girl's head in with a rock. Really? Violent attack, female victim. Fast forward to 1999, violent attack, female victim.
That was certainly information to digest, to take a look at.
All right, then. Let's go have a chat with Stanley.
Stanley killed once. Does that mean he can kill again? Of course it does. Let's go see Stanley and see what he has to say.
How's it going, sir? We're looking for your son, Stanley.
He's not here. Upon speaking to the parents, we actually learned that Mr. Gendreau had been in town just a few days earlier.
I'm not sure when he'll be back.
It raised suspicion because we weren't able to find him.
Well, if you hear anything, then let us know.
Sure.
Could this individual who committed that murder come back to town and have done it again?
Could have fled up north into Boston.
Or down towards New York. Either way, it's going to be tough to find.
Full autopsy report just came in.
The medical examiner's report came back. Blunt force trauma and drowning was ultimately determined to be the cause. She had also been electrocuted.
Once we had a clear picture from the ME's office, unfortunately, I think the attack on her was savage-like, is the best way that I could put that.
Jesus.
Her major organs are ruptured. No one can punch that hard, even someone in a blind rage. But they can jump up and down on the body and create that kind of damage, snapping ribs and crushing the liver and crushing the lungs. This is an attack of someone who's become an animal for those few moments.
This, by far, was the most brutal and heinous crime that I've ever seen. This was an evil individual.
We got to move on this?
Whoever did this is incredibly dangerous. Incredibly so.
Yeah, get me through to violent fugitives, will you?
We brought violent fugitive detectives into this case. Members assigned to that unit get very good at tracking people who don't want to be tracked.
They have to find him right away because he's going to do this again.
Stanley Gendreau. We were unable to locate him originally for a couple of days, but there were two other detectives that ended up locating him, and, he had gotten word that we were looking for him.
Have a seat.
Here we have Stanley. Stanley killed once. Does it mean he killed this woman? No, but it means he could have.
How's it going, Stanley?
Having committed the murder in 65,
Glad you could make it down.
I gotta say that the odds were pretty high that this individual had something to do with this murder as well.
I didn't know you were looking for me.
This was somebody we needed to look very closely at.
There's an old expression, what does a killer look like? Well, the killer looks like you and me. They don't wear a sign that says I'm a killer. They are all potential killers because they're humans.
Where were you the night of the murder?
Home, reading a book.
Is it a romance novel, Stanley?
Now, those policemen are not going to accept an explanation, and they tell him that.
Look, I came down as a courtesy. You've got the wrong guy.
But he absolutely maintains that he has learned his lesson.
I'll give you guys whatever you need.
He comes across as believable.
All right. Let's go.
They polygraph him, they blood sample him, and the result of that is, it's not him. He's not the guy.
The person had nothing to do with this crime. It's a roller coaster ride. We're moving in a very interesting direction, only to learn that we're moving the wrong way.
If you've run out of suspect, the best thing to do is to start over. And where does this begin? Back at the crime scene. What did we not see? What was here that's significant?
Whoa. Check this out.
We knew the house was under construction.
But one thing that we didn't know was that they were in the process then of breaking through a wall to connect the addition to the existing home.
It wasn't secured by any type of lock. So that was a vulnerability that happened at the house that was unique.
Think our killer could have entered here?
This brought a lot of new suspects to this investigation.
Anyone who worked there, or anyone who passed by when the work was being done, would know that this house is vulnerable, and so is the resident. It vastly expands the possibilities. And Lynch doesn't like that, nor would I.
Whoa.
Stephen Lynch is very distraught when he realizes something he hadn't seen before. He discovers that a door has been removed in the process of this construction, and the opening is only covered by a tarp. Anyone who knows this has an entryway into this home involving no effort and no evidence of break-in.
We were going to have to drill down on anybody that had been on that property, that had any knowledge or had ever worked on that property.
All right, fellas, bring it in.
We were going to have a very detailed conversation with those folks involved.
Here's the plan.
We conducted a really thorough sweep of all the residences that were adjacent to hers.
We're gonna find out what happened. Bannon, I want you to run up that hill. You talk to that neighbor first.
Copy that.
At the time, I was in the major crimes unit, but we were kind of split into two groups. And Lieutenant Lynch, he pulled me and the other folks doing that type of work into this investigation.
Talked to some of the neighbors, got the construction crew information, and it was a local construction crew who had been working at the property for about 3 months.
This crew consists of 30 people. Okay. Better than 300, certainly better than 3,000. And we have 30 possibilities here. So let's get to work.
Those were people we wanted to talk to right away.
So 2 of the people on the list are the people that actually cut this hole in the wall. Does that make them uniquely more suspicious than the others? No. But if you're picking someone to talk to first, let's pick the guys that made the hole in the wall. And they are Kevin Moore and Jeremy Matika.
Moore and Motika were work colleagues, and they knew each other. We spoke with Kevin at length.
Kevin's story is straightforward. Explains he was with his girlfriend the night in question. They check out the alibi, it works. So Kevin's out. Now the next focus is Mr. Matika.
I was assigned to go find Jeremy Matika.
They determine he lives in Fall River, Massachusetts, just across the state line. So they go visit him.
Appreciate you talking to me, Jeremy.
Yeah, sure thing. There was nothing about him that stood out. He almost looked angelic. You know, very innocent, blonde hair, blue eyes.
There were no injuries that I could see that would, raise any suspicions. Just an average, contractor. I wasn't forming any impressions, just trying to figure out where was he on the night of May 29th.
Well, I was at work till about 3:30.
Matika says he went home from work that day and started drinking with the teenagers next door, continued drinking all evening with them. Then he went to bed.
He may have been 21, 22 years old, so if he's with 18, 19-year-olds drinking beer and drinking rum, it sounds like he's being honest about it if he's acknowledging something that, he knows he may get in trouble for.
The next morning I went up and visited.
The next day, he said he went to visit his girlfriend who was spending some time in Cape Cod.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy.
Sure thing.
We'll be in touch.
He was pretty specific about his alibi. And for us, there was good things that he put timelines on that we certainly knew we could check on later.
Tricia, thanks for coming in such short notice.
When we spoke to Motika's girlfriend,
Can you tell us about where Jeremy was?
she corroborated Jeremy's story that he had been drinking beer and drinking rum to about 1 a.m.
Or at least that's what he told me when I saw him the next day.
At some time around 8 or 9 a.m., he decided to get up and drive out to where his girlfriend was on the Cape.
He seemed really hungover.
He kept throwing up, and he spent most of the day in bed. Well, now, he didn't mention that to us. What's he up to here?
That's when we started doing more follow-up.
Thanks for coming in.
They do a background on Jeremy Matika. He has a criminal record. He was arrested for kidnapping and assaulting a woman in Massachusetts. A history of violence toward women. This case is extreme violence toward women. That's a clue in the murder business.
It was not to the level of this savage attack, but it was certainly of note as to Motika's history.
Jeremy is rising above his 29 fellow workers as the guy that's the most interesting so far. Jeremy is a candidate for this.
As you talk to somebody, they'll say one thing, and then maybe the next time they'll give you additional information. So we did go back and talk to him to try and corroborate what he was saying.
So help me clarify a few things. You said you left work around 3:30 p.m. Where'd you go from there?
The second time, he told me some information that he hadn't previously. And he said he had stopped at a bar on the way home.
And what bar was that?
I don't remember the name.
He says he ordered a pizza that night.
Yeah, I got a pizza.
And the local shop should know that, again trying to provide himself with an alibi.
You sit tight.
Trying to get out of him things that we could track down and verify whether that was what happened.
They check with the pizza shop. Jeremy's truthful. He ordered a pizza, but it was the night before the homicide.
Stopped to get some beer on my way home.
Every time somebody speaks to Jeremy, Jeremy's got different things to say. Are the inconsistencies significant? No, but they are inconsistencies. And that's where it begins. People lie for a reason.
By all accounts, Motika left work at 3:30.
We were able to corroborate that he was at the neighbors next door drinking from 6 p.m. until at least midnight.
That's where things get fuzzy.
And then that's it. We don't have any other idea of where he was after that.
So that was certainly a factor in this.
He ultimately has no account for the hours between midnight and 9 a.m. That's a very long time. An adequate amount of time for him to do what was done to Angela.
Detective Tella.
Hey, Detective, this is Kevin. We talked a few days ago.
Jeremy Motika has a co-worker named Kevin Moore, who the police have already talked to and already eliminated.
Thought I'd just give you a call.
What's going on?
Yeah, Jeremy's been acting weird the past.
He calls me to tell me that Jeremy was acting suspicious, just different while on the job.
Okay, like what?
He's just been saying some things that don't really make a lot of sense.
It's because my prior arrest. He's trying to pin this on me.
Jeremy was telling Kevin police were trying to pin this crime on him because of his prior criminal record.
They're out to get me.
And he was very agitated and very distressed.
I wouldn't have touched her. Come on, think.
It's reasonable to think that somebody might be anxious that now we've spoken to them twice about a homicide.
Well, I mean, they interviewed all of us.
Kevin says to Jeremy, well, don't worry about it. You were never upstairs in this house, so there can't be anything up there from you. And Jeremy once again gets excited and agitated.
Now, let's say my fingerprints will be in her bathroom, because I use it sometimes.
You did?
Yeah, man, I gotta go to the bathroom sometimes. Sue me.
Kevin thought that was interesting.
He knew that what Motika was saying was inconsistent in his recollection of their work on the property while they were there with Angela Spence-Shaw.
But then something even more interesting took place.
See them looking at shoe prints?
They are still going to work at the crime scene every day. Jeremy sees a box from the Rhode Island State Police, and it says shoe impressions on the box.
How many people have the same shoe prints, man? No.
Later in the day, Kevin overheard Jeremy on the phone talking to his girlfriend, instructing her in a very agitated way to take his work boots up to Cape Cod.
Wanting to get his shoes as far away from that scene as possible, to me, speaks to trying to get rid of evidence involved in this case.
Appreciate you coming forward with this, Kevin.
What's on Kevin's mind?
Kevin believed this whole conversation was out of the ordinary, and to him, it was in some ways alarming.
It certainly was helpful that Kevin was now supplying this information of his own suspicious concerns regarding what Motika was trying to say, how he's trying to account for himself.
Now, we bring in his girlfriend.
This place in Fall River and take them.
She tells us about the shoes that he asked her to remove from their apartment in Fall River and bring them to the Cape Cod residence where her parents lived.
Why would he do that?
I have no idea.
The next question is, have you ever done this in the past?
Never.
And she thought it was highly suspicious.
Thanks for the heads up.
In my mind, as an experienced homicide detective, Jeremy's become more than someone of interest. Jeremy's the guy. It's him. He knows it's him, and he's afraid we're figuring out that it's him. Now we got to figure out how to prove it.
We knew that there was that one element of evidence that he could never walk away from, and that's his DNA profile being in our victim.
We had no probable cause to get a warrant for their blood. The best we could do was ask for their consent.
The next witness statement will be dated June 9th, 1999.
We requested the DNA sample from Jeremy Motika.
My name is Jeremy Motika, October 10th, 1975.
He was quite willing to provide evidence that he had nothing to do with this.
Mr. Motika, prior to signing a release for hospital blood, were you advised of your constitutional rights? Yes.
Jeremy thought that that blood was to match blood left at the scene. He had no idea that we found semen. So this guy did not have a care in the world. He was cool as a cucumber.
And you understand the reason that you are providing a blood sample to the Rhode Island State Police, is that correct? Correct. And you're doing so on your own free will? Correct.
In the United States, you are innocent until you are proven guilty. However, the true test will be match or no match. If the specialized lab cannot match it to Jeremy Motika, Jeremy walks away. And this investigation has gone up in a puff of smoke. All of this effort, all of this work is designed to satisfy one fact. Who took Angela Spence Shaw's life? Who savagely beat her to death and raped her at age 66?
My name is Jeremy Motika.
We believe it's probably Jeremy Motika. But the DNA sampling will tell us the answer to that question.
So we got a solid alibi for Zimmerman, solid alibi for Gendreau.
Lieutenant Lynch?
We get the result of the DNA sample taken from Jeremy Motika. There is an absolute DNA match with what was found in our victim.
Are you sure?
They came up with a number that it was no one but Jeremy Motika. He's the individual that is responsible for this homicide, no doubt about it. That was a moment of satisfaction. That was a moment of relief.
Let's go get his ass.
We were taking Jeremy Motika off the street.
Jeremy is arrested and charged with first-degree murder and first-degree sexual assault. He's interrogated after an advisement of his rights.
You got your DNA at the crime scene.
His accountability for why his semen would be associated with this investigation is that he engaged in sexual intercourse with his girlfriend at times before he came into work, and that he would use Angela Spence Shaw's bathtub to wash himself off.
You don't understand.
And therefore, that's how his DNA sample got into the victim, because she then took a bath after he used the bathtub. What? Earth to Jeremy. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, and I've heard a lot of dumb things.
Why don't you just tell us what happened? Get it off your conscience.
I mean, he's a sociopath.
I had nothing to do with this, and you know it.
Reaching for any kind of excuse or grasping at straws to try and save his ass, you know.
You fabricated these results.
He's not going to admit anything.
I didn't do it.
Because, after all, he didn't do anything. He's innocent.
I had nothing to do with this.
And you know it. You're trying to pin this on me.
Well, all right then.
Good luck with that.
Go to jail, Jeremy. Do not pass go. Do not collect $100. Just go to jail and stay there until you die.
Unfortunately, Jeremy Motika doesn't have the conscience to say why he did what he did. And what he did were unspeakable acts towards a woman in her mid-60s, a grandmother.
Jeremy meets this woman. He knows she lives alone. He's there every day. What does that add up to in his mind? Victim, someone who can be overcome. someone who can be used to satisfy his needs if that moment comes.
Motika has done work at the property that day. He then goes on, engages in drinking alcohol. And for whatever reason, makes a decision to drive into Little Compton and onto Angela Spence Shaw's property.
He had to drive about 20 minutes from Fall River, Mass. And know that there was coordination on his part to do this, that's a whole nother level of sickness.
He enters that home because he knows he can. He attacks this woman. She's 66 years old. He doesn't care about that. He beats her unmercifully in the face. He rapes her. He jumps up and down on her like she's a bed cushion. He's satisfying some need within him to punish a woman. And he selected her to do that with. What made him do that? I don't know.
I have no idea of what that sociopathic mind can justify in those moments.
Then he drags her and throws her in a bathtub.
The whole point of him putting her in that tub was to wash away the semen.
He was trying to clean up as best he possibly could what he had done.
He wants the police to believe it's an accident. By throwing an appliance into the water when it's plugged in and running, causing electrocution to occur.
Those are decisions that Jeremy Motika made in taking Angela Spence Shaw's life without any ounce of remorse as to what he did to Angela.
Jeremy Motika goes to Cape Cod the next day, but he throws up, he's sick. The vomiting is from exposing himself to what he knows he can be. He can be Dr. Jekyll, but he can certainly be Mr. Hyde.
Did this man, Jeremy Motika, kill and rape 66-year-old Angela Spence Shaw? That is the question jurors must try to answer.
On an early morning hour, Sunday, May 30th, to get in your car, ride down to Little Compton on Pine Point Road, enter the property of Angela Spence Shaw.
No.
Certain of that?
Positive.
On the stand, in his own defense, Motika told jurors that he felt state police were trying to pin the murder on him.
I was just some guy doing carpentry work. That's all.
Despite the fact that he doesn't want to own up to his responsibilities, I felt very confident that Jeremy Motika would be found and held accountable for what he did to Angela Spence Shaw.
Jury finds the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. Count 2, the jury also finds the defendant guilty of first-degree sexual assault.
They convict him and send him away forever.
He received a life without parole sentence, because that was what I believe, personally, was the appropriate and just sentence for this case.
The most frustrating thing was not being able to hear those words come out of his mouth.
Jeremy Motika is a sociopath. As a sociopath, you have no human emotions. You don't feel love or guilt or compassion or sympathy or empathy. You are not capable of those emotions. The only thing you understand is rage.
You know, I learned a long time ago trying not to totally interpret the acts of sociopathic criminals. The justification for it lies with them. The only gratifying look back at this is that we were able to provide those sons with an answer.
Sitting with the family in court, it broke my heart. It was quite emotional, but it brought us great satisfaction that we removed this dangerous predator from the street because he was just getting started.
Stephen Lynch is a quarterback of a professional team of homicide investigators. The game is what they do. Jeremy was not going to escape, and Jeremy didn't.
Been confined to that bed, going to the bathroom on himself for several days. This completely contradicted the image of a sudden, quick collapse. Knowing Lana could not sleep there, the family decided they had to get the ruined mattress out of the room immediately. It was extremely heavy, weighed down by the moisture. Together, they managed to haul the mattress out and toss it out of the house, their minds racing with unsettling questions. Later that evening, when a heartbroken Rosie finally managed to talk with Lana on the phone, she desperately sought answers. "What happened?" Rosie pleaded through her tears. Lana calmly replied that Steve had not been feeling well for a few days. "Well, why did you not call somebody?" Rosie pressed, her protective instincts flaring. "Why did you not let somebody know he was that sick?" Lana smoothly deflected, saying, "Well, he was starting to feel better." Lana also claimed that the reason Steve never called anyone himself was because he had been sleeping very heavily and had completely misplaced his personal cell phone a full week earlier. Lana insisted that the phone had been missing for several days, and they could not find it anywhere. This explanation stopped Rosie in her tracks. Her brother was a man who was absolutely never, ever without his phone. He was a businessman who was practically attached to his device. It went everywhere with him, functioning as his lifeline to his friends, his mates, and his family. It was at that exact point that Rosie felt a deep, chilling intuition. She felt strongly that something very sinister was going on, even though she did not yet know what it was. Seeking to manage the practicalities of the sudden loss, Rosie bravely asked his widow about Steve's last will and testament. Steve and Rosie had talked many times about exactly what it was that he wanted to do when his time eventually came. He had specifically and passionately expressed that he wanted to be buried in a beautiful, historic cemetery down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, close to his family roots. But when Rosie asked Lana about accessing the document, Lana flatly stated, "There is no will." Furthermore, Lana had already rapidly made all the final arrangements without consulting the extended family. She announced that Steve was due to be cremated immediately, and she was already planning a memorial service at their home. On August 4th, 2018, Lana held a service for Steve at the house on Lake Wylie. It was a highly emotional gathering. Everybody there felt such a deep, personal connection to Steve. It was incredibly hard for anyone to stay calm. Even though it was officially supposed to be a joyous celebration of his magnificent life, guests just could not help but feel the deep, deep sorrow permeating the air. During the service, a close friend took the microphone, echoing Steve's own talent for public speaking. If there's any space where it is okay to be sad and to cry a little bit, this is that time. And I think that it is okay today that we celebrate a life truly well lived and at the same time be profoundly sad. However, the memorial brought more shocks for Rosie and the family. They were highly surprised and disturbed to find that Lana had already started to aggressively clear out all of Steve's personal belongings. She had already taken all of his meticulously tailored clothes, all of his personal grooming items, and claimed she had donated them all to the local Veterans Affairs charity. Rosie was almost knocked off her feet when she looked into the master closet. She saw the sheer number of empty wooden hangers hanging silently in that massive closet, with not a single stitch of his clothing remaining. It felt like he was being erased. Adding to the alarm, a lot of his expensive, collected watches were missing. A lot of his signature jewelry was missing. Most distressingly, his cherished wedding ring was completely missing. Lana's firm claims about Steve not having a will raised even further. Glaring suspicions among the family members. Establishing a will was something that Steve and Rosie, and Steve and many of his business partners, had discussed at length. They knew exactly how important it was to him to make absolutely sure that everything was in perfect order for the future. There was absolutely zero logic in a man like her brother, a former accountant, a person who was famously meticulous with his vast finances, not having an updated will. The family collectively felt like something was fundamentally failing to add up. They gathered together in private and realized they were all on the exact same page. They all knew in their hearts that something hidden was going on. Driven by love and a demand for truth, the family immediately called the local medical examiner's office. They pleaded with the officials, please do a full autopsy. And at the very least, if you're not going to do a full physical autopsy, you must do a complete toxicology screening. Moved by the family's earnest pleas and the odd circumstances, the medical examiner agreed to run the tests. Detective Moats of the York County Sheriff's Office was also formally notified of the families. Growing suspicions regarding Steve's sudden death. The wheels of justice, though slow, began to turn. Chapter 7, The Silent Poison. When the initial physical autopsy report finally came in, it was anticlimactic. It listed standard signs of mild heart disease and initially pointed toward death by natural causes, seeming to support the coroner's first impression. The medical examiner confirmed that it was still highly likely that a heart attack was the culprit. However, they all had to wait patiently for the comprehensive toxicologist report to come back from the state lab to finally make an actual, legally binding finding. The authorities informed the family that it would take a few agonizing weeks before those detailed. Chemical results arrived. So, the family waited on pins and needles for the absolute truth to come out. They just knew, deep in their bones, that there was something very wrong. Weeks later, the call finally came, when the official toxicology report on Steve Clayton's blood came back. The results were nothing short of shocking. The blood screen showed notable traces of several powerful sedatives, including marijuana, temazepam, and Benadryl. But that was not the end of the findings. The absolute biggest shock in the toxicology results was the overwhelming presence of a chemical called tetrahydrozoline. Tetrahydrozoline is the active pharmaceutical ingredient commonly found in standard, over-the-counter eye drops, such as Visine or Murine. The medical experts explained to the detectives that tetrahydrozoline is absolutely never meant to be ingested orally. When accidentally swallowed in small doses, it makes a person feel very ill. It triggers severe nausea, dizzy spells, and will eventually cause a person to pass out. But in large, concentrated quantities, it is highly deadly. It aggressively attacks and shuts the central nervous system down entirely, and it will eventually kill a human being. The detectives learned from the medical experts that a massive dose of tetrahydrozoline can severely limit the vital blood supply to major organs, ultimately leading directly to a fatal heart attack. The chemical perfectly mimicked the natural death the coroner had initially suspected. Detective Moats immediately reviewed the body camera footage from Sergeant Day's initial response. Scanning the background of the master bedroom, the detective spotted it, up on a tall, wooden dresser, situated completely away from the bed where Steve had been incapacitated, sat a bottle of Visine. It was placed high up, exactly where a severely weakened man could not possibly get up to reach it. The picture was now crystal clear to law enforcement. This was absolutely not a natural death. Detective Moats knew he urgently needed to have a very serious talk with Lana Clayton. 5 weeks after the sudden, tragic death of her husband, Lana Clayton was formally brought in to be questioned by county detectives. They seated her in an interview room, initially framing the conversation casually. If you were a witness in this case for us, We just need to clarify a few things. The detective began smoothly. They want to know more about the various medications found in Steve's blood. Lana confidently listed several things. He took Benadryl, she offered, running through a long list of minor supplements and aids. But glaringly, there was absolutely no mention of tetrahydrozoline, the specific drug that had ended Steve's life. The detectives knew that tetrahydrozoline was completely colorless, completely odorless, and completely tasteless. This chemical profile makes it the absolute perfect substance to give to someone if a person secretly wants to poison them without raising any alarm. The measured level of tetrahydrozoline in Steve's blood was so incredibly high that it was scientifically clear that it was the primary cause of his death. It was a massive, lethal level, no matter what angle the medical examiner looked at it from. The detectives decided to press on, tightening the net. Somehow or another, there was a uniquely large amount of Visine found in his system. So that is exactly what we are trying to get to the bottom of today. Lana shifted in her chair, her demeanor altering slightly. I know he puts the Visine in his coffee. He puts it in there every single day. The detective leaned forward. What do you actually know about it? What I know about it, Lana repeated, feigning slight confusion. I know it makes you have severe diarrhea. At this stage, there were basically two main theories that the police were actively considering. One, he was intentionally poisoned and there was definitive foul play. Two, he foolishly ingested on his own, whether it was intentional or bizarre. Unintentional habit. But as the police began to gently probe into the daily realities of Steve and Lana's relationship, Lana's narrative shifted dramatically. How has your life been together? The detective asked. Lana sighed deeply, painting a new, darker picture. Sometimes we would have great fun and everything, and then sometimes I would be walking on eggshells. All the time I was on eggshells. Lana began to claim to the officers that the beloved, generous Steve actually had a terrible dark side. He can be really nasty, she insisted. What exactly does nasty Steve look like? The detective inquired. He is really verbally abusive, Lana stated, calling me terrible names. Like, what would he call you? I do not know. Stupid, among other things. I do not know. Just all kind of mean things. I could see his temper escalating until you notice you just have to. Try and stay completely out of his way. Following Lana's concerning interview, detectives immediately ordered a comprehensive, legal search of the Clayton house. A team of crime scene investigators swept through the property. They were specifically looking for any unwashed cups or drinking glasses that might still have a chemical residue in them. They were looking for absolutely anything they could find that would help them definitively determine what could have caused this tragedy. They also searched for anything document-wise that would definitively show financial trouble or deep marital strife. During that intense search period, Lana suddenly reached out, telling a responding officer that she urgently wanted to speak once again directly with Detective Moats. Detective Moats readied his recording equipment to capture exactly what Lana had to say. I told you a little bit about Stephen earlier, Lana began, her voice shaking. But it was much worse than what I told you. He was verbally and physically abusive. She claimed he would yell at her and constantly call her names. His anger just built up. You know, I would do some minor thing that would irritate him until the point where he would just completely explode. She paused, taking a breath before continuing her story. After he had that initial medical incident, which he said was vertigo, I was taking care of him and everything, but I was still so incredibly angry at him. And a girlfriend of mine at work once told me that if you want to get even with somebody, just put some Visine in their drink. It will just cause diarrhea. It was right then that Lana dropped an absolute bombshell confession on the detective. When I saw that bottle of Visine sitting on the table, that old advice just came back to me. and I just took it and squirted it." "And what exactly did you squirt it into?" the detective asked softly, not wanting to break her momentum. "Into his water." "So you do not know the full amount? I mean, you just squeeze a bottle." "I think I put the whole thing in," she admitted quietly. "So the whole bottle?" "I think I did. I squeezed it very hard. I just saw it sitting there, and I just did it." The detective remained outwardly calm, though he knew he had just secured a massive breakthrough. "What are your plans for tonight now?" he asked casually. "Just stay here at the house," she replied. "You will be okay. I know it is a lot on your plate right now." Lana looked down. What if I do? What if I actually cause his death with the Visine?" "Is there anything else that you want to formally add?" the detective asked. "If there is more, it is best to get it off your chest now." "No, that is it," she finalized. It was a completely damning confession. But legally, the detectives could not arrest Lana right at that exact moment. They needed to secure the proper warrants. After Lana officially confessed, the police left the residence. They spent the rest of the evening getting their proverbial ducks in a row as far as exactly what specific criminal charges would be officially made. They prepared the paperwork and were fully ready to come back the very next day to place Lana, Clayton, under arrest. But early the following morning, the police dispatch received a frantic call from one of Lana's next-door neighbors. The neighbor had found scattered notes of suicide at the house. They were deeply afraid that Lana had severely harmed herself. Lana, being a smart woman, knew full well that the police were coming back the next day. She knew without a doubt that they would arrive with active warrants for her arrest. In a desperate act, she had turned the oven gas on, went upstairs, and took a handful of pills in an attempt to end her own life before facing justice. Emergency responders rushed into the home and found her completely unconscious in her bed. She was swiftly taken by ambulance into the local hospital, where she was medically treated, stabilized, and ultimately released by the doctors. Upon her medical release, she was immediately handcuffed and officially arrested by the authorities on the severe charges of murder and maliciously tampering with food items. Chapter 8. The Arc of Justice. The extended family was immediately informed of Lana's dramatic arrest. A detective from York County personally called Nick. "Hey, Nick, I just want to bring you fully up to speed here," the detective said seriously. Lana confessed. Nick was driving when he got the call. He pulled his car over the side of the road right away. The news hit him like a literal ton of bricks. He felt like he had been struck with a baseball bat to the face. Nick immediately called Rosie. When he answered the phone, Rosie was on the other end, absolutely screaming in shock and heartbreak when she heard the words that Lana had killed him. The legal process that followed was long and grueling for the grieving family. On January 16, 2020, a formal court proceeding took place. Facing overwhelming forensic evidence, Lana made the calculated decision to accept a legal plea deal. She formally admitted her guilt in front of a judge on the reduced charges of voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a drug or food product. The original grand jury indictment had been for premeditated murder. The judge clarified for the record that she was pleading guilty to a legally lesser offense of voluntary manslaughter. In her defense statements, Lana continued to insist that her own medical knowledge of the chemical was purely based on watching fictional television movies, genuinely believing it would only cause temporary discomfort and diarrhea. She adamantly insisted to court that she absolutely never intended for Steve to actually die, and that she merely wanted petty revenge for his alleged verbal abuse. But Steve's devoted friends and loyal family absolutely did not buy the narrative that Steve was ever abusive to her. They watched in pain as she tried to publicly assassinate Steve's sterling character. However, her claims were quickly overshadowed because countless other people who knew him deeply, especially the many young men who he had personally mentored eagerly came forward to the media and the courts to say he was a truly wonderful, patient, and kind person. They testified that there was absolutely no abuse of any sort with Stephen. The family firmly believed she was simply trying to do absolutely whatever she could to save her own skin from a very, very long prison sentence, and possibly even the ultimate death penalty. Everyone who truly knew Steve knew he was a gentle soul, completely not capable of physically harming someone. Furthermore, based on the detailed timeline in the toxicologist's report, the state prosecutors firmly believed that Steve had suffered immensely for 3 whole days before. Finally passing away, Lana had told the police that the fatal dose was administered on a Thursday morning, but the prosecutors knew as a matter of hard scientific fact from the leading toxicologist that such a rapid demise from a single dose was biologically impossible. He would have died that very Thursday morning if he had ingested that massive, fatal amount all at once on Thursday. For him to have been so violently sick all of that time, bedridden and incapacitated, strongly indicated to the experts that she had continually, methodically given him the medication throughout that entire time period. The evidence suggested she poisoned him with Visine little by little over days. And Lana, a trained nurse who took an oath to heal, absolutely never sought to help him or call an ambulance after the initial poisoning began. The family pointed out that Stephen absolutely would not have willingly stayed in a heavily urine-soaked mattress. He was a known clean freak. He would not have stood for such a degrading thing if he had any physical power to stop it. The grim reality was that he was simply too weak from the poison to get up and move. There was no active phone left in the house for him to use. There was no traditional landline installed, so he could not even drag himself to call somebody for rescue. The family argued that this cruel setup put him in the horrifying situation of being essentially tortured in his own bedroom, with absolutely no way to get outside help. The prosecution's theory was that finally, she knew on Saturday that the end was near. It was then that she coldly squeezed that whole remaining bottle of Visine into his drinking water, made sure he drank it, and then casually went outside to mow the grass, so she did not have to sit inside and watch the final horror of his death. The family felt that instead of being a nurse that helps heal the sick, she was truly the nurse from hell. Ultimately, 53-year-old Lana Clayton was firmly sentenced by the judge to serve 25 years in state prison. Throughout the entire process, she never, ever once admitted that she truly intended to kill Steve. But the family felt the cold, hard facts showed completely otherwise. Rosie spoke to the press outside the courthouse, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel like there is absolutely no penalty that would have been great enough for Lana. This was 3 entire days of methodically poisoning my best friend, and then ultimately killing him." Nick echoed the sentiment, the cold thought process that had to deliberately go into her putting on this massive charade, and how she confidently carried that right on through till the very end. I think that is the absolute definition of a monster. But what chilled the family to the bone was the realization that Lana had almost completely got away with the perfect crime. There almost was not a professional autopsy performed. If there had not been an autopsy ordered due to the family's relentless pressure, the official ruling of the coroner would have stood forever. The official record would have stated that this was likely a hard cardiac episode, and it was just a tragedy of natural causes. The terrible truth was that she ultimately did this to herself. Had she just acted the part of the same quiet, gentle Lana, politely grieving the tragic loss of her husband Steve, without hastily erasing his belongings, no one would have likely had any deep suspicion whatsoever. Although Lana legally insisted Steve's death was entirely unintentional, his devoted family and the skilled prosecution team firmly believed it was a highly deliberate, calculated act, primarily motivated by immense financial gain. One absolute, glaring motive for the crime was Steve's vast personal wealth. Without a legally binding will in place in the state of South Carolina, every single asset automatically goes directly to the surviving spouse. So, Lana would certainly know that if Steve is gone, she gets absolutely everything they owned. The family realized that if somebody truly wanted to do something incredibly malicious like this, all they technically had to do was secretly get rid of the existing will, and then everything in the estate legally belonged to them. Epilogue, a legacy of light. With the trial concluded and justice served as best as the legal system allowed, the extended family was left to try to move on and rebuild their lives without Steve's vibrant presence in their daily lives. They often found themselves reminiscing about his giant personality. Friends and family would gather and warmly recall his signature booming greeting. Hello, hello, hello. I miss a whole lot about Steve. Rosie shared tearfully with her husband, but I really miss his voice. I just so deeply miss hearing his strong voice. She would often play back the old wedding videos, watching him smile at the camera and joke. This is my way of, getting away from the emotional stuff. For Nick, the loss was about the energy his uncle brought into the world. I think what I honestly miss most about Steve is his over-the-top, brilliant personality. He was this big, boisterous, gregarious character that positively enters a room and just enthusiastically takes over everything, in the best way possible. Everyone agreed that Steve was a truly amazing person, a man who built an empire but preferred to spend his time on the floor playing games with children, or mentoring young professionals trying to find their way in the world. It has been incredibly difficult for the family not having him around to offer his wise counsel or his comforting bear hugs. The single thing I miss the absolute most about Steve is his deep, genuine laughter, a lifelong friend noted at a memorial gathering, and his unique ability to instantly light up any room he walked into, though the pain of his departure remains a heavy burden for those left behind. They choose to focus on the immense good he did while he was here. They remember the man who gave away his sister with tears in his eyes, the man who built businesses and gave back to his community, and the man who loved fiercely and generously. Stephen was tragically stolen from everyone who loved him. Steve was stolen from everyone who loved him, but his enduring legacy of generosity, brilliant laughter, and profound familial love will never, ever be erased from their hearts. This is the story of a successful and generous businessman, a man whose presence could fill a room with warmth and laughter the moment he stepped through the door. His name was Steve Clayton. To those who knew him, he was not just a friend or brother. He was a force of nature, a mentor, and a guiding light. He was the kind of person who always had a smile to share and a joke to tell. Steve had a heart as vast as the ocean. He spent his days lifting others up, ensuring that his family, his friends, and even mere acquaintances felt valued and loved. But the world can sometimes be a complex place, and even the brightest lights can attract unexpected shadows. When Steve met a nurse who seemed to have a heart as big as his own, he fell deeply in love. He could not hide the profound feelings he held for her. Yet, this story is not merely about romance. It is a tale of a family's unbreakable bond, their pursuit of truth, and the enduring power of a good man's legacy. It is a reminder that while wealth offers no absolute protection against the unpredictable tides of life, love, and justice eventually find their way to the surface. Chapter 1, A Promise Kept. The air in Miami was warm and filled with the promise of new beginnings. It was March 10th, 2007, a monumental day for Clayton family. The sun shone brightly over the gathering, casting a golden glow on the faces of friends and loved ones. It was the wedding day of Rosemary Clayton, known affectionately to her family as Rosie. She was finally marrying the love of her life, William Leslie. For Rosie, the joy of the day was deeply intertwined with a profound sense of loss. Just 11 months prior to her wedding, the family had lost their beloved father. The absence of the patriarch left a void that could never truly be filled. But in his place stood 52-year-old Steve Clayton, Rosie's oldest brother. When their parents first married, Steve was merely 2 or 3 years old. He grew up in a lively household with 4 sisters, with Rosie being the youngest. Because there was a 10-year age difference between them, there was never a moment in Rosie's life when Steve was not there. He was her big brother, her protector, and her hero. He was everything a little girl could ever want in an older sibling. In high school, he played football and wrestled, making him seem larger than life in her young eyes. When the time came to walk down the aisle, Rosie knew exactly who she wanted by her side. She asked her brother to step in for their late father. Naturally, there were many tears shed, but they were tears of profound gratitude and love. Rosie could not imagine anyone else standing in that sacred place. As they walked down the aisle, the officiant asked a traditional question, inquiring who gave the woman to be married to the man. Steve, his voice filled with emotion and pride, answered firmly that he did, in the loving memory of their father. It was a deeply sentimental moment for everyone gathered. Following their father's passing, Steve had seamlessly transitioned into the role of the head of the family. Although he never had children of his own, he naturally embodied a father figure to his siblings. During the wedding reception, despite his many duties as the best man and the emotional anchor for the family, Steve's vibrant personality took center stage. He was the entertainment, the one who kept everyone calm, and the one who kept the room echoing with laughter. He had a natural gift for it. When it was time for the toast, Steve was the first to stand. He grabbed the microphone with his signature greeting. "Hello, hello, hello," he chimed, instantly bringing smiles to the faces of the guests. His toasts were always improvised, spoken straight from the heart. He used humor as a gentle shield to navigate the overwhelming emotions of the day. He turned to William, his new brother-in-law, and thanked him sincerely for making Rosie so incredibly happy. Steve spoke of their father, reminding Rosie of the promise he had made before their father passed away. A promise to take care of his sister, to honor her, and to remind her always of how much she was loved. Then came the father-daughter dance. As Steve and Rosie took the floor, a surprise awaited them. Before the traditional music began to play, a voice echoed through the speakers. It was a recording of their dearly departed father. His warm voice filled the room, recounting how the best moments of his life were when Rosie was a little girl, climbing onto his knee and telling him she loved him. There was not a dry eye in the venue. Steve held his sister close, providing the strength and comfort she needed, proving once again that he was the steady rock of the Clayton family. Chapter 2: The Self-Made Mentor. Steve's journey to becoming the generous man everyone adored was built on a foundation of hard work and sharp intellect. After graduating from high school, he attended college and earned a degree in finance. He quickly matured into a remarkably shrewd and successful businessman. Alongside a trusted partner, Steve founded a company called Physical Therapy Resources. Through relentless dedication and smart business strategies, the local venture expanded into a massive national corporation, with physical therapy centers established all over the country. Steve's success brought him substantial wealth, but money never changed his core character. He remained approachable, warm, and deeply connected to his roots. Eventually, he sold his interest in the business. His lifelong goal had been to retire by the age of 40. He missed that ambitious target by just 1 year, officially retiring at the age of 41. Selling his business freed Steve to do whatever his heart desired. And what his heart desired most was to give back to the world. Instead of simply enjoying a life of idle luxury, he became an active mentor to a large group of young men and women. He spent countless hours helping them start their own businesses, offering financial advice, and guiding them as they figured out the direction they wanted their lives to take. Steve was extraordinarily generous, not just with his financial resources, but with his most valuable asset, his time. Despite his massive success, his close network of friends, and his loving family, Steve's own romantic life had always been somewhat rocky. He was a man with a giant personality and an even bigger heart. He constantly searched for a partner who was as focused, determined, loving, and caring as he was. As his family noted, that was a very tall order to fill. By the time he was 52, his family figured it would take a truly remarkable and special person to sweep him off his feet. Steve sought someone he could connect with on every level, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. He wanted to share his beautiful life with someone who understood the depths of his generosity and matched his zest for life. Chapter 3. The Nurse from Oklahoma. 3 years after Rosie's wedding, Steve decided it was time for a change of scenery. In late 2009, he packed up his life in the sunny state of Florida and moved to the lush, green landscapes of North Carolina. Steve had always loved physical activity. He enjoyed walking, hiking, and anything that involved being outdoors. The move from South Florida to North Carolina provided him with the perfect opportunity to spend much more time surrounded by nature. Within just a few months of settling into his new life, Steve called his family with exciting news. He announced that he had finally met someone special. His relatives could hear the joy radiating through the phone. He possessed a renewed glow that had been missing for a while, and his excitement was palpable. Her name was Lana Walsh. She was 12 years his junior, a Veterans Affairs nurse who had grown up in the quiet heartland of Oklahoma. When Steve introduced her to the family, she struck them as being incredibly quiet, yet very sweet and polite. Her reserved nature stood out sharply against Steve's vibrant disposition. Steve's personality was gigantic. He filled every space he occupied with booming laughter and grand stories. Lana, by contrast, was described by some as a wallflower, content to stand in the background while Steve commanded the spotlight. Despite these stark differences, Steve was absolutely certain that she was the one he had been waiting for. When they were together, they were incredibly affectionate. They were constantly arm in arm. Steve was always hugging her, squeezing her, and kissing her forehead. His family, seeing how happy he was, embraced Lana with open arms. Rosie felt immense joy for her brother. Anyone that Steve loved would automatically find a place in her heart. It was not long before Steve asked Lana to move in with him. After they spent considerable time getting to know each other, Steve persuaded her to join him in Charlotte. Steve had a reputation for being a very convincing man, and his charm easily won her over. As they began their life together, they decided to expand their little family with some furry additions. The first dog that Steve and Lana brought into their home was Guinness, a delicate and energetic Italian greyhound. They fell in love with the breed's gentle nature, and shortly after, they adopted a second greyhound, whom they named Sadie. With Lana by his side and their dogs running around the yard, Steve finally felt that he had found his missing piece. He always spoke highly of her to his friends, lovingly referring to her as his Lana Sue. He simply could not hide his affection. He was very much in love. To the outside world, it appeared that Steve had found a deeply grounding presence in Lana, a quiet peace that balanced his roaring energy. Chapter 4. The Lakefront Dream. Steve Clayton had moved to North Carolina looking for a fresh start, and he found a whole new future. When he danced with his sister at her wedding all those years ago, he had dreamed of finding his own special someone. Finally, 6 years later, that dream culminated in a beautiful ceremony. It was a lovely day in November 2013. Many of Steve's friends and family members traveled to North Carolina to share in his joy. The wedding took place at their house in Charlotte. It was an intimate, beautiful event. The love between Steve and Lana was practically beaming. They both looked radiant and full of hope for the years ahead. Soon after they tied the knot, the newlyweds decided to relocate to their forever home. They moved just over the state border into South Carolina, settling on the serene and picturesque banks of Lake Wylie. The property was breathtaking, resembling a perfectly painted postcard. Their gorgeous ocean blue home sat elegantly on a sprawling piece of lakefront property. Surrounded by towering trees and the gentle sounds of nature, the couple poured their hearts into refurbishing their new residence. They decorated the spacious rooms with Steve's cherished collection of artworks and antiques. Objects held deep personal meaning for Steve. He was very proud of his possessions, as each piece was entirely unique and carried its own story. Living on Lake Wiley allowed the couple to fully indulge in their shared love of the outdoors. Whenever there was something fun and active to do, Steve was always the first one out the door, approaching every adventure with unmatched enthusiasm. Their relocation also brought them geographically closer to Steve's extended family. His nephew, Nick French, who had married Steve's niece in 2010, lived nearby. Nick and his family spent a great deal of time with Steve and Lana after they moved. They shared dinners, attended concerts together, and celebrated every major holiday as a tight-knit unit. Furthermore, the new house was only a 30-minute drive from Lana's son and her twin granddaughters. Steve and Lana never turned down an opportunity to babysit. Steve had a remarkable way with children. Deep down, he had always retained a childlike wonder and playfulness. He was the kind of man who would immediately get down on the floor to play games and make silly noises just to hear a child laugh. With the kids around, there was never a single dull moment in the Clayton household. The home was filled with the joyous sounds of games like Scrabble and hilarious rounds of Pie Face. Videos captured by the family showed Steve enthusiastically attempting to demonstrate how to do the limbo for the twin girls, explaining the rules with exaggerated gestures, only to have the girls far more interested in eating their ice cream. Steve did not mind. His goal was simply to bring joy to those around him. 5 years into their marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be thriving in their beautiful, peaceful lakefront paradise. Chapter 5: The Shadow of Illness. The tranquility of the Clayton home was unexpectedly shattered in June 2018. Steve, a man known for his robust health and boundless energy, suddenly fell violently ill. He began complaining of severe dizziness and an overwhelming sense of vertigo. He mentioned to Lana that his ear was in terrible pain and that he felt deeply nauseous. The illness struck quickly, causing him to become sick in the yard while tending to his beloved garden. Lana told the family that Steve believed he might have contracted sunstroke from working outside in the heat. As a trained nurse, Lana took charge of his care. She advised him that the best remedy was strict bed rest. According to the accounts shared with the family, Steve lay down to rest, and the next time he fully opened his eyes, an astonishing 36 hours had passed. When Rosie heard the news, she immediately called Lana, sick with worry. She asked Lana for an explanation regarding this mysterious and frightening illness. For a healthy, active man of his age to simply lose 36 hours of time was highly unusual and deeply concerning. Lana reassured Rosie with a calm demeanor. She stated that Steve was doing fine, that she was monitoring him closely, and that she was ensuring he had everything he needed to recover. Although Steve had never experienced an illness quite like this before, Lana confidently suggested that he was merely exhausted and that his larger-than-life energy was finally catching up with him. Rosie, trusting her sister-in-law's medical background, felt a sense of relief. She was comforted in knowing that Lana was there, utilizing her knowledge as a nurse to take care of her brother. Miraculously, just 2 weeks later, it appeared that Lana's prescribed rest had worked perfectly. Steve seemed to bounce back completely, returning to his old, energetic self. To celebrate his recovery in the holiday, he threw a spectacular party for the 4th of July. The gathering at the lake house was just as wonderful as every other party Steve had hosted. He was back to being his normal, affectionate, and gregarious self, making sure everyone had a fantastic time. Home videos from that sunny afternoon showed Steve pulling Lana into a joyful dance on the patio. He grabbed her hand, and the rest of the family quickly followed suit, joining in the laughter and the music. Friends watched as Steve hugged and kissed his wife, looking completely and utterly in love. Life was good again at the Clayton home. Looking at the smiling faces that day, no one in attendance harbored a single doubt that Lana and Steve's lives together would be anything but long, happy, and secure. Chapter 6. The Bottom of the Stairs. The warmth and joy of early July gave way to an unimaginable tragedy just a few weeks later. On the morning of July 21st, 2018, an urgent call came into the York County 911 dispatch center. Police units were swiftly dispatched to the picturesque home on Lake Wiley. Body camera footage recorded by the responding officer, Sergeant Day, captured the somber and haunting scene that awaited them. As the officers walked to the grand front doors, they immediately saw Steve Clayton lying motionless at the bottom of the elegant main staircase. Tragically, there was nothing the paramedics or officers could do. Steve was already gone. The officers spoke in hushed, low voices, respectful of the grieving widow. Lana Clayton was found just around the corner, crying and visibly distraught. Sergeant Day approached her gently, introducing himself and explaining that he would be staying with her until the coroner arrived to handle the necessary transport and procedures. He offered her a seat, wanting to make her as comfortable as possible during such a traumatic moment. Through her tears, Lana recounted the events leading up to the tragedy. She told Sergeant Day that Steve had been suffering from severe dizziness for the past 2 days, experiencing another intense bout of vertigo. She claimed that on Thursday morning, he had stood up, became incredibly dizzy, and collapsed. She explained that she had managed to help him upstairs to their bedroom, and since that moment, he had not been back downstairs. When asked about her whereabouts at the exact moment of his passing, Lana explained that she had been working outside. She stated she was mowing the lawn very quickly, and when she came back inside the house, she found him lying on the floor. She expressed deep remorse, crying as she described trying to place a blanket underneath him, but stating that she lacked the strength to move him. Lana claimed that, despite her professional training as a nurse, she was entirely unable to render medical aid to her husband because he was already unresponsive. She told the officers that panic overtook her, realizing she could do nothing more. Hearing a motorcycle passing by outside, she immediately ran out to the street to wave the rider down and begged him to call for help. The news of Steve's passing spread quickly. Nick French, Steve's nephew by marriage, was actually on duty as a police officer in a neighboring jurisdiction when his phone rang. It was his mother. She delivered the crushing blow. Uncle Steve had died. Nick stood frozen in disbelief. Logically, he knew the words were real, but his mind simply refused to process the information. He rushed to the lake house as quickly as his vehicle would carry him. The entire drive down, his mind raced with unanswerable questions. How could this happen? Why did this happen? Hundreds of miles away, Rosie received the same devastating phone call. When her nephew delivered the news, her world collapsed. She kept repeating that it was not possible. How could her strong, vibrant brother, the pillar of their family, suddenly be gone? Because Rosie was over 700 miles away. Nick and his local family immediately rallied around Lana to offer their support. Nick felt a deep sense of empathy for her, knowing how much he had claimed to love his Uncle Steve. He could only imagine the horrific trauma of finding a spouse on the floor in such a manner. Lana repeatedly expressed her fear that Steve's severe vertigo had caused him to tumble down the grand wooden staircase. She cried about how horrible the fall must have been. However, as part of standard protocol, Sergeant Day carefully inspected the scene for any signs of an altercation or struggle. He noted that the situation looked like a natural death, but he needed to be thorough. He walked up the intricate labyrinth of the large house to the master bedroom. The space was quiet. There were absolutely no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, and no indication that anyone else had been in the home to harm him. The bedsheets were rumpled, but nothing suggested violence. The coroner arrived and conducted a preliminary examination. There were no contusions, bruises, or broken bones to suggest that Steve had suffered a violent fall down the stairs. Instead, analyzing the carpet's direction and footprints. Sergeant Day concluded that Steve had likely managed to walk to the bottom of the staircase on his own before collapsing. The coroner noted a specific blue coloration across the top of Steve's chest, drawing on her experience. She suggested to the officers and the family that this marking was often indicative of a massive heart attack. Sergeant Day gently shared this theory with Lana, advising her not to dwell on the terrifying thought of him falling down the stairs, as the evidence pointed toward a sudden cardiac event. Through her grief, Lana softly replied that she believed it was simply the day God had chosen for him. Chapter 7. Unsettling Discoveries. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, Nick and his family took on the heavy burden of cleaning up the home. They wanted to ensure the house was as comfortable as possible for Lana, knowing she was exhausted and would have to spend the night surrounded by the memories of her lost husband. However, as they moved upstairs to tidy the master bedroom, they were met with shocking and deeply unsettling discovery. The moment they crossed the threshold, they were hit by an overwhelming smell of human filth. Upon closer inspection of the bed, where Lana claimed Steve had been resting to recover from his vertigo, they found massive, dark discoloration spots in the very center of the mattress. It was entirely soaked in urine and excrement. The state of the bed raised immediate, glaring questions in Nick's mind. For a mattress to be soaked through to that extreme degree, Steve would have had to be lying there, unable to use a restroom, for several days. Reeling from the smell and the implications, the family decided they had to remove the mattress from the house immediately. It was so completely saturated that it was incredibly heavy. They could barely lift it to carry it outside. Meanwhile, Rosie managed to get Lana on the phone later that evening. Desperate for answers, she gently asked Lana to explain exactly what had happened. Lana repeated that Steve had not been feeling well for a few days. Rosie, confused, asked why Lana had not called anyone in the family to let them know he was sick, or why she had not called for professional medical help sooner. Lana vaguely replied that she thought he was starting to feel better. She also claimed that Steve had not called anyone himself because he was sleeping very heavily and had misplaced a cell phone nearly a week earlier. This detail struck a harsh, dissonant chord within Rosie. Her brother was a modern businessman. He was never, ever without his cell phone. It was practically an extension of his hand, going everywhere with him. The claim that it was missing for several days seemed entirely out of character. It was at this precise moment that a cold feeling washed over Rosie, a distinct, terrifying realization that something very sinister was happening, even if she could not yet name it. The red flags continued to multiply. Rosie and Steve had shared many deep conversations about their futures and their final wishes. Steve had been very explicit that when his time came, he wanted to be buried in a specific, beautiful cemetery in Fort Lauderdale, close to his roots. Yet, when Rosie asked Lana about Steve's last will and testament, Lana flatly stated that there was no will. Furthermore, Lana had already made swift arrangements for Steve's remains. Without consulting the extended family, she declared that Steve was going to be cremated immediately. To an astute family, these actions defied all logic. Steve was an accountant by trade and a meticulous financial planner. It was entirely inconceivable that a man who had built a national business and managed complex finances would neglect to draft a will. The family collectively agreed that something was fundamentally wrong with the narrative they were being fed. Determined to find the truth, the family banded together and urgently contacted the medical examiner's office. They pleaded for a full autopsy to be performed before any cremation could take place, requesting that, at the very least, a comprehensive toxicology screening be conducted. Understanding the family's earnest concerns, the medical examiner agreed. On August 4th, 2018, while awaiting the results, Lana hosted a memorial service for Steve at the lake house. It was a highly emotional day. Everyone present felt a profound, deep connection to Steve, it was incredibly difficult to remain calm, as the deep sorrow permeating the room heavily outweighed the intended celebration of his life. During the memorial, Rosie and other family members went to the master bedroom and were nearly knocked off their feet by another shocking discovery. Lana had already cleared out the vast majority of Steve's belongings. The closet was filled with rows of empty hangers. Lana casually mentioned she had donated all of his clothes to a local charity, adding to the alarm. A lot of Steve's valuable watches and unique jewelry pieces were completely missing. Most heartbreaking of all, his wedding ring was gone. The detectives at the York County Sheriff's Office, including Detective Moats, were quietly notified of the family's growing suspicions. However, when the initial autopsy report was generated, it listed signs of heart disease and pointed to death by natural causes, just as the coroner at the scene had suspected. The family, however, refused to accept this preliminary conclusion. They knew they had to wait for the final toxicologist report, a process that would take several agonizing weeks. They waited on pins and needles, trusting their intuition that a dark truth was waiting to be brought to the light. Chapter 8: The Toxic Truth. When the comprehensive toxicology report on Steve Clayton's blood finally returned to the investigator's desk, the results were nothing short of shocking. The screening revealed traces of several sedatives in Steve's system, but the most alarming and prominent discovery was the presence of an incredibly high concentration of a chemical called tetrahydrozoline, commonly abbreviated as THZ. THZ is the active medical ingredient found in common over-the-counter eye drops, intended solely to relieve redness in the eyes. It is absolutely never meant to be ingested orally. When a human swallows a small dose of THZ, it acts as a severe neurotoxin. It induces violent illness, extreme nausea, severe dizziness, and eventual unconsciousness. In large, concentrated quantities, however, it is extraordinarily deadly. It completely shuts down the central nervous system, drastically limits the blood supply to vital organs, and swiftly induces a fatal cardiac event. Reviewing the body camera footage from the day of Steve's passing, detectives noticed a crucial detail. In the background of the master bedroom, sitting high atop a tall dresser entirely out of reach from the bed, where the incapacitated Steve lay, was a bottle of eye drops. The picture suddenly became terrifyingly clear. Steve Clayton had not suffered a natural heart attack. He had been poisoned. 5 weeks after the sudden, tragic loss of her husband, Lana Clayton was formally invited to the police station for an interview. The detectives initially approached her as a witness, delicately asking her to clarify the types of medications Steve might have been taking. Lana confidently provided a long list of harmless, standard medicines, but conveniently made absolutely no mention of eye drops or THZ. The chemical THZ is entirely colorless, odorless, and tasteless. When slipped into a beverage, the victim would have no idea they were consuming a lethal substance. The toxicology report indicated that the level of THZ in Steve's blood was astronomically high, a definitively lethal dose. As the interview progressed, the detectives slowly applied pressure. They confronted Lana with the undeniable scientific evidence. A massive amount of eye drop fluid had been found in Steve's system. They asked her directly what she knew about it. Lana's demeanor began to shift. She nervously deflected, stating that she knew eye drops could cause digestive distress, but offered no explanation for how they ended up in her husband's body. The police were working with two primary theories. Either someone intentionally poisoned him, or he ingested himself by accident. To pivot the narrative, Lana began weaving a dark tale about her marriage. She claimed that behind closed doors, she was constantly walking on eggshells. She alleged that Steve, the man known to everyone as a jovial, gentle giant, had a terrible dark side. She accused him of being verbally and physically abusive, claiming he would call her demeaning names and explode in fits of anger over trivial matters. Following this interview, detectives secured a warrant to thoroughly search the lakefront home. They were looking for any cups or glasses harboring chemical residue, as well as documents or journals that might confirm Lana's claims of marital strife. Sensing the walls closing in, Lana contacted Detective Moats and requested to speak with him again. During this recorded conversation, Lana dropped a massive bombshell. She tearfully recounted the events of the week Steve died. She repeated her claims of his verbal abuse, stating that his anger had been building up. She claimed that a co-worker had once told her a rumor that slipping eye drops into someone's drink was a harmless way to exact revenge by causing them minor digestive discomfort. Lana confessed that in a moment of anger, while Steve was dealing with his supposed vertigo, she saw the bottle of eye drops on the table. She admitted to picking it up and squirting the liquid directly into his drinking water. When Detective Moats pressed her on exactly how much she had squeezed into glass, Lana's answer sealed her fate. She admitted that she squeezed the bottle hard, emptying what she believed to be the entire container into his water. Despite this damning confession, Lana maintained that she only meant to cause him temporary discomfort, asking the detective aloud what would happen to her if her actions had accidentally caused his death. With her confession documented, the police department quietly gathered their resources to finalize the arrest warrants. They planned to return to the lake house the following morning to take Lana Clayton into custody. However, early the next day, emergency services received a frantic call from one of Lana's neighbors. Having found alarming suicide notes, the neighbor rushed into the house. Knowing the police were coming for her, Lana had turned on the gas inside the home and ingested a large quantity of pills in an attempt to end her own life. First responders found her unconscious in her bed. She was immediately transported to the hospital, where she received life-saving treatment. Upon her medical release, the police were waiting. She was immediately arrested and charged with murder and the malicious tampering of food products. When Detective Moats called Nick to inform him of the confession and the arrest, Nick had to pull his vehicle over to the side of the road. The reality of the situation hit him with the force of physical blow. When Rosie received the news, she broke down completely, screaming into the phone at the absolute horror that the woman they had welcomed into their family had taken her brother's life. Chapter 9, The Light Endures. The legal process was arduous and emotionally draining for the Clayton family. On January 16, 2020, facing an overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence, Lana Clayton accepted a plea deal to avoid a grueling trial and the potential for the death penalty. She pleaded guilty to the lesser offenses of voluntary manslaughter and tamper with drug or food product. During the hearing, Lana stood before the judge and insisted that she never intended for her husband to die. She claimed her knowledge of the chemical came solely from watching movies, and that she merely wanted to cause him discomfort as revenge for his alleged abuse. Steve's friends and family vehemently rejected her attempts to assassinate his character. Numerous individuals whom Steve had mentored, loved, and supported over the years came forward to testify to his gentle soul. They painted a clear, undisputed picture of a man entirely incapable of the abuse Lana described. The prosecution outlined a far more chilling reality, backed by unassailable medical science. Based on the breakdown of the toxins in Steve's blood, the medical experts determined that the fatal dose could not have been administered on Thursday morning, as Lana had claimed. If it had, Steve would have passed away much sooner. The prolonged timeline and the horrific state of the soiled mattress indicated a methodically cruel process. The evidence strongly suggested that Lana had been secretly slipping the medication into Steve's drinks for days, slowly stripping away his strength. As the toxins took hold, Steve, a man known for his immaculate cleanliness, became entirely incapacitated, trapped in his bed without a cell phone or a landline to call for help. The prosecution argued that on Saturday, realizing what she had done, she administered the final, massive dose, and then went outside to mow the lawn. deliberately removing herself from the house so she would not have to witness his final moments. Instead of acting as a compassionate nurse, she had used her medical knowledge as a weapon. Furthermore, the motive seemed glaringly clear to the investigators: financial gain. Without a finalized will in the state of South Carolina, a deceased person's entire estate automatically transfers to the surviving spouse. The destruction or hiding of any existing will would guarantee that she inherited his vast fortune. The judge, listening to the agonizing details and profound grief of the family, sentenced 53-year-old Lana Clayton to 25 years in federal prison. For the Clayton family, no amount of prison time could ever equate to the loss of their beloved Steve. They recognized how incredibly close Lana had come to getting away with the perfect crime. If the family had not trusted their instincts, if they had not relentlessly pushed the medical examiner for a full autopsy and toxicology report, Steve's passing would have forever been recorded as a simple, natural tragedy. It was their deep love for him that ultimately brought the truth into the light. Moving forward without Steve was the hardest challenge the family had ever faced. They missed his booming laughter echoing across the lake. They missed his over-the-top personality, the way he could enter any room and instantly make every person feel like they were the most important human being in the world. Rosie missed the sound of his voice, the way he would answer the phone with his cheerful, "Hello, hello, hello." But amidst the sorrow, a profound legacy remained. Steve Clayton was a man who spent his life building up those around him. His generosity, his kindness, and his unwavering dedication to his family could never be erased by the dark actions of one individual. He had taught his family the importance of standing up for the truth, the value of unconditional love, and the strength found in unity. Though he was stolen from everyone who loved him, his spirit lived on in the businesses he helped build, the young professionals he mentored, and the countless joyful memories he left behind. The story of Steve Clayton ultimately became a testament not to the tragedy of his final days, but to the brilliant, enduring light of a life incredibly well lived. This is the story of a successful and generous businessman who met a nurse with a heart he believed was as big as his own. He was a man who lived loudly and loved fiercely. She struck everyone as being very quiet, but very sweet and very nice. He fell head over heels, unable to hide the feelings he harbored for her. He was very much in love. But when a mysterious sickness consumed their marriage, his family just knew that there was something profoundly wrong. They learned the hard way that money is no protection, and that sometimes a sudden passing is not a natural death. The story truly begins on a bright day, March 10th, 2007, in Miami, Florida. It was a momentous day for the bride, Rosemary Clayton, and her entire family. She was finally marrying her love, William Leslie. Standing proudly beside Rosie was her oldest brother, 52-year-old Steve Clayton, ready to walk her down the aisle. Exactly 11 months prior to the wedding, they had lost their father. Amidst the grief and the bittersweet joy of the wedding preparations, Rosie had asked her brother if he would step in. Of course, there were a lot of tears. She could not imagine anybody else standing in place of their dad. When the minister asked who gave the woman to be married to the man, Steve's voice was firm and full of emotion. He answered that he did, in the memory of their father. It was incredibly sentimental to be gathered for something so special where their dad was not present with their father's passing. Steve had officially become the head of the family. Even though he had never had children of his own, he had always been a father figure to his siblings. When their father and mother were first married, Steve was just about 2 or 3 years old. He grew up alongside 4 sisters, with Rosie being the youngest, because he was 10 years older than her. There was never a moment in Rosie's life when Steve was not there. Steve was her big brother, and he was her hero. He was everything a little girl would want in a big brother. In high school, he played football and he wrestled, feats that made him seem larger than life to his little sister. After high school, Steve graduated from college with a degree in finance. He quickly matured into a shrewd and brilliant businessman. Alongside a partner, Steve started a company called Physical Therapy Resources. Through hard work and dedication, it eventually became a national company with physical therapy centers located all over the country. Colleagues met him in hospitals and boardrooms, easily becoming his friends due to his magnetic personality. He was wildly successful and eventually sold his interest in the business. From that point forward, he was retired. His lifelong goal had been to retire at the age of 40. He missed that ambitious mark by merely 1 year, officially retiring when he was 41. Selling his business freed Steve to do whatever he truly wanted. And what he wanted to do most was give back to the world. He mentored a large group of young men, helping them start up businesses or helping them figure out what direction they wanted their lives to take. Steve was extremely generous, not only with his vast resources, but with his precious time. And Steve always had time for his family. Home videos often captured him teasing his Uncle Max, keeping the room roaring with laughter. The family cherished those moments. Their dad had been a much more serious man, always focused and stern. But Steve brought levity everywhere he went. When his sister Rosie got married, it was Steve's good humor that made him the life and soul of the occasion. During the reception, Steve was the first man to stand up and give a toast. He grabbed the microphone with a booming greeting. His words always ad-libbed straight from the heart. He joked that his humor was his way of avoiding the heavy, emotional stuff. He turned to the groom, William, thanking him deeply for making his sister so incredibly happy. Steve was never one to hide his emotion for long. His voice softened as he recalled their father's final wishes, reminding everyone that their dad had asked him to take care of his sister and to honor her. The toast perfectly encapsulated who Steve was: great companions, great partners, and a brother who delighted in seeing his sister happier than ever before. After the heartfelt speeches, Steve stepped up for the father-daughter dance. As they took to the floor, before the music even started, they shared a very powerful moment. The surprise audio recording of their dearly departed father played through the speakers, his voice echoing to the banquet hall, expressing his deep love for his little girl. Steve held his sister tight as she wept. That day, Steve had so many duties. He was a father figure. He was the best man. He was the entertainment. He kept everyone calm, and he kept everyone laughing. He was an absolute natural at it. Yet, despite his immense success and his close network of family and friends, Steve's own romantic life had been rocky. He looked for a partner who was as focused, determined, loving, and caring as he was. That was a remarkably tall order to fill. Now 52, his family figure would take a very special person to sweep him off his feet. Steve was always looking for somebody on a level he could connect with emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. 3 years later, that is exactly what happened. Chapter 2, A New Horizon. In late 2009, Steve decided to leave his home state of Florida for a much-needed change of pace in North Carolina. He really loved being physical and active. He loved walking and engaging in anything to do with the great outdoors. Moving from South Florida to North Carolina gave him the opportunity to be out in nature far more often. Within just a few short months of settling into his new life, Steve excitedly announced to his family that he had met someone special. He seemed to carry a glowing aura that he had been missing for quite a while. Her name was Lana Walsh, 12 years his junior. She was a nurse who had grown up in Oklahoma. When the family finally met her, she struck them as being very quiet, but undeniably sweet. This quietness stood out starkly because Steve was the exact opposite of quiet. Steve's personality was gigantic and room-filling, whereas Lana was more like a gentle wallflower. Despite their glaring differences, Steve was absolutely sure she was the one. They were incredibly affectionate with each other, always walking arm in arm. Steve was constantly hugging her, squeezing her and kissing her. His family felt happy for him. Anybody that he loved, they were ready to embrace with open arms. It was not long before Steve asked Lana to move in with him. After they had gotten to know each other quite a bit better, Steve convinced her to relocate to Charlotte. Steve could be very persuasive when his heart was set on something. Soon, they added some new additions to their growing family. The first dog that Steve and Lana brought home was Guinness, a delicate Italian greyhound. They fell in love with the breed and quickly decided they wanted another one, bringing home a second greyhound named Sadie. With Lana by his side, Steve finally felt he had found his missing piece. He always had magnificent things to say about her, affectionately referring to her as his Lana Sue. He could not hide the deep feelings he held for her. He was very much in love. His family noted that Steve seemed to find himself well grounded in her presence, experiencing a profound sense of peace. He had come to North Carolina seeking a change from his old life and had found a whole new glorious future. When Steve had danced with his sister at her wedding, he had dreamed of finding his own special someone. 6 years later, he was ready to marry the love of his life, the dedicated Veterans Affairs nurse, Lana Walsh. The wedding took place on a lovely day in November 2013. Many family members traveled up to North Carolina just to be there and share in the joy of the day. Steve made it incredibly special for everyone. The ceremony took place at their beautiful house in Charlotte. It was a stunning event where the love between the bride and groom was visibly beaming for all to see. Soon after exchanging their vows, the couple decided to relocate once more, this time moving into what they believed would be their forever home, just over the border in South Carolina. They found a stunning property situated on the serene banks of Lake Wylie. It looked like a picture plucked straight from a postcard, a gorgeous, ocean blue home sitting majestically on a sprawling piece of lakefront land. The couple enthusiastically set about refurbishing their new home, carefully decorating it with Steve's extensive collection of unique artworks and rare antiques. Steve was the kind of person who viewed objects as highly personal reflections of history, and he was very proud of his curated possessions. The move also allowed the couple to indulge deeply in their shared love of nature. If there was a fun, outdoors activity to be done, Steve was always the first one there, entirely gung-ho about the adventure. Their relocation to South Carolina also meant the pair were much closer to Steve's extended family. His nephew, Nick French, who had married Steve's niece in 2010, lived nearby. Nick and his family spent a great deal of time with Steve and Lana after the move. They would frequently go out for dinner, attend lively concerts, and gather for special events on every major holiday. They were also just a short 30-minute drive from Lana's own son and her beloved twin, granddaughters. The generous couple never said no to a bit of babysitting. Steve had a magical way with children because, at his core, he had always been a child at heart himself. He was the kind of guy who would happily get down on the floor and play endless games with the kids. With children running around, there was never a single dull moment in the Clayton household. Joyful home videos showed Steve attempting to describe how to do the limbo dance while Lana's twin. Granddaughters watched with innocent amusement. He would demonstrate getting low to the ground to go under the imaginary stick, playfully trying to coax the girls into joining the dance. Lana would be tickled pink watching him, even if the twins were sometimes more interested in eating their ice cream. Steve thoroughly enjoyed playing all kinds of games, whether it was a serious match of Scrabble or a silly, messy children's game involving a spinner and a whipped cream contraption. He was a huge, lovable teddy bear, and the kids adored playing with him, constantly hanging off his arms and back. Lana was always game for the fun as well, laughing brightly as the mechanical games inevitably resulted in a face full of foam. 5 years into their marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be thriving in every possible way. Their life was a tapestry of joyous family gatherings, peaceful lakefront mornings, and deep companionship. Chapter 3, The Shadow Falls. However, the bright summer of 2018 brought an unexpected darkness. In June of that year, Steve suddenly fell terribly ill. He complained of severe dizziness and vertigo. He mentioned that his ear hurt and that he felt profoundly nauseous. It was so intense that he became physically sick out in the yard. His family felt deeply concerned for him, knowing he had struggled with minor vertigo issues in the past, but this seemed remarkably severe. Steed himself had told relatives he had been very ill and could not figure out exactly what was wrong. He recalled working out in the sun-drenched garden when the dizziness and nausea suddenly overwhelmed him, accompanied by a pounding headache. He originally suspected he might have simply suffered from heat stroke. As a trained nurse, Lana advised that the absolute best thing for Steve was strict bed rest. Steve later recounted to his family that he remembered laying down to rest, and the very next time he opened his eyes, a staggering 36 hours had mysteriously passed. Worried sick, Rosie called Lana on the telephone to see if she could explain her brother's alarming missing time. It was deeply unsettling for any healthy person to lose 36 hours of memory. Lana reassured Rosie that Steve was perfectly fine, that she was watching over him closely, and that she was making sure he had everything he needed. Though Steve had never been completely incapacitated like this before, Lana theorized that he was simply exhausted. Rosie felt comforted in knowing that Lana, with all her professional nursing knowledge, was there to care for him. The family assumed that Steve's larger-than-life energy reserves had finally demanded a rest. Just 2 weeks later, it appeared that Lana's dedicated treatment had worked miracles. Steve seemed entirely back to his old, vibrant self. He enthusiastically threw a massive, joyous party for the 4th of July. That summer celebration was just as spectacular as every other party the family had ever attended at the Clayton estate. Steve was his normal, highly affectionate self. Everyone had an absolutely wonderful time. Videos from the afternoon showed Steve pulling Lana close, dancing joyfully on the patio while the rest of the family eagerly followed suit, joining in the laughter and music. Observers noted how they hugged and kissed, looking completely, undeniably in love. Things seemed perfect at the Clayton home on the lake. No one harbored any doubts that Lana and Steve were destined for a long, happy life together. Then came the morning of July 21st, 2018. A distressing call came into the York County 911 dispatch center. Police units quickly arrived on the scene. Body camera footage recorded by the responding officer, Sergeant Day, captured the heartbreaking reality of what they found upon entering the beautiful blue house. Right at the bottom of the grand, sweeping staircase lay Steve Clayton. Unfortunately, by the time help arrived, he was already gone. He was dead. The officer spoke in hushed, low voices, moving carefully through the foyer. Just around a corner stood Lana Clayton, visibly distraught and crying openly. The officers were exceptionally gentle, not wanting to say anything that might further distress the grieving widow. Sergeant Day gently approached Lana to find out what had transpired in the quiet morning hours. Lana told Sergeant Day that Steve had been suffering from terrible dizziness for the past 2 days. She claimed he had been very ill with vertigo again. She explained that she had found him on Thursday morning, that he had stood up, become overwhelmingly dizzy, and collapsed. She recounted having to help him up the stairs to their bedroom, and noted that he had not been back downstairs since that moment. When the officer asked where she had been when the tragedy occurred, Lana explained she had been outside, quickly mowing the lawn. She claimed that upon coming back inside, she found her husband at the bottom of the stairs. She wept as she described trying to place a blanket underneath him, completely unable to render any medical aid despite her nursing background. She stated she had panicked, running outside when she heard a passing motorcycle, frantically waving the rider down to ask them to call 911. At the local police department, Steve's nephew, Nick French, was on active duty as a police officer when he received the devastating news. His mother called him, her voice breaking as she delivered the words that Uncle Steve had died. Nick was struck with profound disbelief. He knew the news was real, but his mind simply refused to process it. He rushed to the house as quickly as he possibly could, his thoughts racing with endless questions of how and why. When Rosie received a phone call from Nick 700 miles away, she completely broke down. She could not comprehend how her vibrant, strong brother could suddenly be gone. With Rosie trapped in Florida, Nick and his immediate family rushed to rally around the weeping widow. Nick felt awful for Lana, knowing how much she had loved Steve. He could not begin to imagine the trauma of finding a spouse on the floor in such a state. Lana repeatedly expressed her fears to the family and police that Steve's severe vertigo must have caused a fatal fall down the long staircase. Sergeant Day meticulously checked the scene for any signs that Steve might have been attacked or involved in a physical struggle. While the scene initially pointed toward a natural, albeit tragic, death, standard procedure required a thorough check. The sergeant bravely ascended the grand staircase to inspect the second floor. Walking through the massive, unfamiliar house was slightly unnerving, but the officer found no signs of a struggle. There was absolutely nothing to suggest that another person had been upstairs or had done anything malicious. In the master bedroom, the bed sheets were heavily rumpled, but again, nothing suggested a fight. The local coroner arrived and began their initial assessment. There were no contusions, no heavy bruising, and no broken bones to suggest that Steve had suffered a violent tumble down the wooden steps. It appeared as though Steve had somehow managed to walk to the bottom of the stairs before, ultimately collapsing. The coroner suggested that Steve had likely suffered a massive heart attack. When asked what led to that specific medical opinion, the coroner noted the distinct coloration of Steve's face and a line of blueness that stretched across the top of his chest. According to the coroner's experience, this pooling of blood was often a strong indication of a cardiac event. Back in the living room, Sergeant Day gently informed Lana of their preliminary theories. The officer mentioned observing the direction of the carpet fibers on the stairs, indicating footprints that suggested Steve had walked down under his own power rather than falling. Lana wept softly, stating she believed it was simply the day God had chosen to take him. Chapter 4, Unraveling Threads. While Lana digested the tragic news, Nick and his family stayed behind to help clean up the house. They wanted to ensure the home was somewhat comfortable for Lana, knowing she would be entirely exhausted and still had to spend the night there. However, they were profoundly shocked by what they discovered when they went up to the master bedroom. Immediately upon entering, they were hit by a staggering, foul smell. It was the undeniable stench of human waste. Looking closely at the bed, they found huge, dark discoloration spots in the very center of the mattress. The heavily soiled mattress raised immediate and deeply disturbing questions in Nick's investigative mind. The sheer volume of liquid required to soak so deeply through a thick mattress meant that Steve had to have been confined to that bed, unable to use a restroom for several days. Nick and his relatives realized they had to remove the biohazard from the room. It was so saturated and heavy that they could barely lift it, eventually hauling it out of the pristine house. When Rosie finally managed to speak with Lana on the telephone later that evening, she pressed for details. She asked Lana exactly what had happened and why Steve had become so ill. Lana repeated that he had not been feeling well for a few days. When Rosie demanded to know why Lana had not called anyone or let the family know he was that sick, Lana deflected, claiming that Steve had just started to feel better. Furthermore, Lana claimed that Steve had not called anyone himself because he had been sleeping very heavily and had mysteriously misplaced his cellular telephone a full week earlier. This detail sent a cold shiver down Rosie's spine. Her brother was never, ever without his phone. He was a businessman who was perpetually attached to his device. It went everywhere with him. It was at that exact moment that Rosie felt a deep, sinking intuition that something very sinister was going on, even if she could not yet name what it was. Seeking clarity, Rosie asked the widow about Steve's last will and testament. Steve and Rosie had discussed his final wishes many times over the years. He had explicitly stated his desire to be buried in a beautiful, specific cemetery in Fort Lauderdale alongside his family. To Rosie's absolute horror, Lana coldly stated that there was no will. Furthermore, Lana had already made completely different arrangements. She declared that Steve was going to be cremated immediately, and she was already planning a memorial service at their home. On August 4th, 2018, Lana hosted a memorial service for Steve at the lakefront property. It was a highly emotional gathering. Everyone in attendance felt such a deep, personal connection to the man they had lost. It was incredibly hard for the guests to stay calm. Even though the event was billed as a celebration of his vibrant life, the attendees could not help but feel a deep, suffocating sorrow. Family members spoke eloquently, noting that if there was ever a space where it was acceptable to be deeply sad and to cry, it was right there, honoring a life so beautifully lived but so abruptly ended. Yet, during the memorial, Rosie and the extended family made another startling discovery. Lana had already begun systematically clearing out all of Steve's personal belongings. The family was nearly knocked off their feet when they opened his massive closet and found nothing but rows of empty hangers. Not a single stitch of his clothing remained. Lana claimed she had promptly donated it all to the Veterans Affairs Hospital. Adding to the alarm, many of Steve's expensive watches were missing, along with various pieces of fine jewelry. Even his wedding ring was gone. Lana's firm claims about Steve not having it will raise the family's suspicions to a boiling point. Steve was an extraordinarily meticulous former accountant. He was a man who handled his finances with absolute precision. There was absolutely no logical universe in which a man like Steve Clayton would fail to draw up a comprehensive will. The family quickly realized they were all on the exact same page. They knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that a terrible deception was unfolding. Acting swiftly, the family contacted the medical examiner's office. They pleaded with the officials, demanding that a full autopsy be performed before cremation could take place. They insisted that, at the very least, a comprehensive toxicology screening had to be conducted. Fortunately, the medical examiner agreed to halt the cremation process. Detective Motes of the York County Sheriff's Office was officially notified of the family's mounting suspicions regarding the sudden death. When the initial autopsy report was generated, it listed signs of underlying heart disease, pointing once again to a death by natural causes. The visual evidence still suggested a fatal heart attack. However, the authorities knew they had to wait for the toxicologist's highly detailed report to come back before making a final, official ruling. It would take several agonizing weeks before those laboratory results arrived. The family waited on pins and needles, praying for the absolute truth to come out into the light. They knew in their bones that something was profoundly wrong. Chapter 5, The Invisible Poison. When the final toxicology report on Steve Clayton's blood was finally returned to the detectives, the results were absolutely staggering. The screening showed trace amounts of several sedating substances, including marijuana, temazepam, and Benadryl, but that was not the end of the list. The most shocking and baffling discovery in the results was a massive, lethal presence of a chemical called tetrahydrozoline. Tetrahydrozoline is the active chemical ingredient found in common over-the-counter eye drops, typically used to reduce redness in the eyes. It is a substance that is never, under any circumstances, meant to be ingested orally. When consumed in very small doses, it causes severe physical distress, inducing acute nausea, extreme dizziness, and eventual unconsciousness. But when administered in large quantities, it becomes a silent, deadly weapon. It aggressively attacks the central nervous system, shutting it down completely, severely limiting the blood supply to vital organs, and ultimately triggering a fatal heart attack. Reviewing the body camera footage from the morning of the death, detectives noticed something chilling. Sitting atop a tall dresser in the master bedroom, completely out of reach from the bed where Steve had been incapacitated, sat a bottle of eye drops. The truth crystallized instantly for the investigators. This was not a tragic natural death. This was a calculated homicide. 5 weeks after the sudden, unexplained death of her husband, Lana Clayton was formally requested to come in for questioning. Detective Moats and his team needed to sit down with the grieving widow. In the interrogation room, the detectives carefully probed Lana about the various medications found in Steve's system. Lana confidently rattled off a long list of medications she claimed Steve had taken, specifically mentioning the Benadryl. However, she made absolutely no mention of the tetrahydrozoline. The eye drop chemical was the perfect poison. It is completely colorless. It is entirely odorless. It is completely tasteless. It is the ideal weapon for someone seeking to commit murder without raising immediate suspicions. Of the victim, the level of the chemical found in Steve's blood was so astronomically high that there was zero doubt it was the primary cause of his death. It was a definitively lethal dose. The detectives calmly pressed forward, directly confronting Lana with the toxicology findings. They informed her that a massive amount of eye drop fluid had been discovered in his system and asked her to explain it. Cornered, Lana frantically changed her story. She suddenly claimed that Steve routinely squirted the eye drops into his own coffee every single day. When the detectives expressed deep skepticism, asking what she knew about the chemical's effects, she nervously replied that she knew it caused severe digestive issues and diarrhea. The police were operating on two main theories. Either Steve had been maliciously poisoned through foul play, or he had ingested the fluid himself, whether intentionally or accidentally. As the police dug deeper into the couple's supposedly perfect relationship, Lana began to paint a very different picture of her husband. She claimed that while they sometimes had fun, she spent the vast majority of her time walking on eggshells around him. She alleged that Steve had a dark, cruel side, stating that he could be incredibly nasty and both verbally and physically abusive. She claimed he routinely called her degrading names, purposefully escalating conflicts until she was forced to hide from his explosive anger. Following this interview, detectives secured a warrant and executed a comprehensive search of the massive lakefront house. They painstakingly looked for cups or drinking glasses that might retain any chemical residue. They scoured the home for financial documents, personal journals, or any evidence that might corroborate Lana's sudden claims of a troubled, abusive marriage. While the search was actively underway, Lana surprisingly contacted the authorities, stating she wished to speak with Detective Moats once again. During this recorded conversation, Lana dropped a monumental bombshell. She tearfully reiterated her claims that Steve had been intensely abusive, yelling at her and calling her names. She claimed that during the week he had suffered from his mysterious bout of vertigo. His anger had been building up, and she had grown incredibly resentful of having to care for him while enduring his supposed wrath. She then confessed that a co-worker at her nursing job had once mentioned an old wives' tale. If you ever wanted to get even with someone, you could secretly put eye drops into their drink to cause severe intestinal distress. Lana admitted that when she saw the bottle of eye drops sitting on the bedroom table, a wave of anger washed over her. She picked up the bottle and forcefully squirted the liquid directly into Steve's drinking water. When the detective asked how much she had poured into the glass, she confessed that she had squeezed the bottle very hard, believing she had emptied the entire contents into his drink. She wept, asking the detective what would happen to her if she had accidentally caused his death with the drops. The detective calmly asked if she had anything else to confess. She quietly replied that she did not. It was a damning, horrifying confession. Chapter 6. The Nurse from Hell. Despite the shocking admission, the detectives could not place Lana under immediate arrest. They needed to systematically organize their evidence, finalize the appropriate legal charges, and secure formal arrest warrants. They planned to return to the lakefront property the very next day to take Lana Clayton into custody. However, early the next morning, Emergency dispatchers received a frantic call from one of Lana's neighbors. The neighbor had discovered scattered suicide notes at the property and was terrified that Lana had harmed herself. Knowing the police were closing in and that arrest warrants were imminent, Lana had intentionally turned on the natural gas in the house. She had then retreated upstairs and ingested a large quantity of pills in an attempt to end her own life. Emergency responders found her completely unconscious in her bed. She was immediately transported to